The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. A modern retelling. Francis Wayland Thurston, narrator of this tale, a reserved Bostonian and heir to his granduncle, Professor George Gamble Angel of Brown University, sorts the old scholar's papers after a sudden, suspicious death. A locked box will redirect his life. Part 1. The Horror in Clay. After the funeral. The papers of Professor Angel, Boston, winter 1926 to 1927. Present day. The first blessing of the human mind is how poorly it connects stray facts. We drift on an island of ignorance surrounded by oceans we're not meant to cross. We study in separate lanes and remain safe. Until one day, two pieces snap together and shows us a slice of reality so unimaginable it changes us forever. That's what happened to me. An old newspaper clipping, the notes of a dead academic, and a clay tablet damp with the sweat of nightmares. Professor Angel, my grand-uncle renowned for reading the oldest inscriptions, died in Providence during the winter of 1926 to 27. Witnesses said a sailor brushed him on a steep street near the waterfront. He stumbled and never rose. Doctors decided it was a lesion of the heart. At the time, I accepted that. Now, I'm not so sure. As executor of his estate, I moved his files to the study for review. His death and mystery behind it warranted a deep dive into his writings. I needed to know more. Most of it was routine scholarship. One small locked box was not, with a keyhole of strange shape, round and wide, unlike the standards we see today. I realized after some time that my granduncle always kept a ring with him, now in my possession. It had similar markings to the locked box, and with some trial and error, I managed to get it open. What I found, however, was something that felt like a door opening in a dark hallway. Before me, a small, rough clay bas-relief, press clippings from around the world, and a pile of notes bound under a stark title penciled in block letters, Cthulhu Cult. This must have been the manuscript my granduncle was working on. The tablet itself was thin and the size of my palm, yet it radiated a pressure like weather before a storm. Above a belt of jagged, unknown characters, writing that looked older than history itself, squatted a hybrid shape, octopus tendrils where a face should be, a thick torso with the hint of scaled wings, and claws folded over the etched block like at prayer. Behind it loomed an impossible architecture, colossal blocks and pillars that felt wrong even in outline, as if geometry had soured. Although modern in appearance, the markings and visage of the dread creature had me wondering if it was inspired by a fevered nightmare, or something much darker and real. A cold chill galvanized my body as I reached for the manuscript. These were the reports my granduncle had witnessed. Further reports of other experiences were present, and my journey began, to understand what held the professor's attention all these years. Part 2. The manuscript and its findings. Professor Angel's manuscript divided his discoveries into two veins. First, the dream reports of a young sculptor named Henry Anthony Wilcox of Providence, March to April 1925. Second, the account of Inspector John Raymond LeGrasse of New Orleans, read aloud to scholars at St. Louis in 1908, along with notes from Professor William Channing Webb of Princeton. The clipping spoke of strange manias, group panics, and asylum surges in that same spring. I began to read in fervor. Report 1 of Professor Angel's Cthulhu Cult manuscript, The Sculptor and the Word That Isn't a Word. Providence, March to April 1925. Pulled from Professor Angel's dated entries and phone messages with doctors and families. On March 1st, 1925, a gaunt, intense art student, Henry Wilcox of the Rhode Island School of Design, arrived at my granduncle's house, carrying the bas-relief still damp from his hands. He asked if the symbols were known to archaeology. They were not. When pressed on the tablet's origin, Wilcox said simply, "I made it last night from a dream of a city that isn't like ours." He described vast, wet stone, cyclopean walls, sky-stabbed monoliths, and carvings that bend the eye from reality. From beneath those blocks came not a sound, exactly, but a pressure that the mind translated into syllables it could barely hold. Cthulhu, Eftagn. Not a language he knew, not any language at all, perhaps, only a shape pressed through sleep and the mind utterly trying to make sense of it. Professor Angel, careful, skeptical, began a regimen. Wilcox was to visit daily and recount each night's dream. The notes recorded days of images, angles that refused to meet like they should, slime-gleaming pillars, a sense of descent, and always the same two alien names snagging in the waking mouth. Cthulhu. Rilya. On March 23rd, Wilcox failed to appear. Angel spirited away to the Wilcox home, where his neighbors reported a midnight shout and a collapse into fever and delirium. He was taken to his family's house. Dr. Toby oversaw the case. The youth raved of a thing miles high that walked. Whenever he neared naming it, he sank into stupor. Oddly, his temperature stayed near normal while his mind burned. At exactly 3 p.m. on April 2nd, the fever broke. Wilcox sat up, calm, with no memory of the last 10 days' dreams or reality. He recovered at once, and the dreams vanished. The entries on him stopped there. He was no longer useful to the professor's purpose. Report 2. The Wider Dream. Various locations, March to April 1925. Montage from Angel's letters. Another document. Professor Angel's circular letter had quietly asked acquaintances on several continents to record their dreams. He graphed replies by date against headlines clipped from papers. Ordinary people reported little. Scientists reported less. But artists, poets, and a few sensitive odd souls wrote of sleepless weeks, of seas and towers, and an unnameable pursuit. Their language tangled and repeated. A celebrated architect broke under the strain on March 23rd and died months later still screaming. Around the world, the papers hinted at unrest and mass hysterias, from suicides in London to cults in California, to whispering trouble in India, to police scuffles in New York. Asylums filled quietly. The dates matched Wilcox's fever like an echo. March 23rd to April 2nd. A massive undergoing of the same unworldly sights of city walls and an ancient being that stood miles high. The similarities among those afflicted were unsettling. The reports on mass hysteria even more so. Report 3. The name resurfaces. St. Louis, 1908. We step further back to a scholarly meeting where a police inspector brought an artifact that academia could not name. Professor Angel gathered notes and clipping from this year to compile a cohesive scene that, seemingly, no one was able to connect before. In 1908, at the American Archaeological Society in St. Louis, Inspector John R. LaGrasse of New Orleans produced a small stone idol taken in a swamp raid. The same squid-faced, wing-hinted croucher carved in an unearthly green-black stone, flecked with metallic fire. The room of experts, men who could place a shard by the curve of its rim, fell silent. No one knew the scripting, nor the hieroglyphs cut along its base. No one knew any rock quite like it. One man, though, Professor William Channing Webb, recalled seeing a crude twin of the image among an isolated Greenland sect decades before, who danced beneath the aurora and chanted syllables he transcribed by sound. LaGrasse compared Webb's phonetics with the same chanting his prisoners had shouted in Louisiana. The phrases matched closely enough to chill the room. Feng Louis, Megalwu Naf Cthulhu Rilye, Wugahanagl, Ftagn. In his house at Rilya, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Report 4. The Swamp Raid, Louisiana, November 1907. Legrasse's account. Night. Cypress columns. Spanish moss like hanging fog. The beat of drums where maps go blank. This is the recounting of Police Inspector Legrasse and his raid in the Louisiana Bayou, and the idol he found, as he described it to the scholars in St. Louis. Summoned by terrified squatters, 20 officers advanced into a stretch of swamp whispered about even by those who feared nothing. The beating of tribal tom-toms led them to a clearing where a ring of fire threw shadows against a large stone monolith, and an idol, Legrasse's idol, perched on top like a spider on a bell. A delirious crowd circled between flames and a grisly outer ring of flesh-clung human and animal remains, while a torrid wailing in the distance, guttural pleas of the captured victims being prepared for sacrifice, served as the background noise to the cacophony of dancing cultists. When the chanting peaked, the officers charged. 5 cultists died. 47 were captured. Those who were rescued explained nothing. The prisoners, once separated, explained too much. They spoke of the great old ones from before mankind, who had come from the sky and now lay in stone vaults deep under the sea. They spoke of a priest named Cthulhu in the drowned city of Relia, waiting for the sky to tilt into the correct pattern so he could rise and rule again. They said thought itself, in dreams, was his voice to those sensitive to hear it. They said the cult was everywhere and always had been, waiting, whispering, keeping the right alive. One elder, a sailor called Castro, added fragments that punched through the skepticism of the note-takers. The old ones were not flesh as we are. They do not die. They lie preserved by spells and will return when the stars align. Then the world will become like them, beyond law, beyond good and evil, a storm of ecstasy and freedom that is only freedom if you no longer recognize the human frame. When asked about books, Castro named only sidelong hints, then murmured a couplet some claim to find between the lines of forbidden pages. That is not dead which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons, even death may die. He refused to speak of sizes or of the black spirits that brought rumors from beneath the seafloor. On history, academies could give no anchorage. The cult left almost nothing in the daylight. Part 3. Back to Providence, Rhode Island, 1925. Present day. Armed with the professor's knowledge from the manuscript, Francis Thurston tracks down Wilcox and Legrasse from the manuscript, testing for authenticity from the reports about them. I visited Wilcox in his home in Rhode Island, albeit nervous after reading through his dossier. When meeting him the first time, he was in good spirits, seemingly not the man from my granduncle's reports. His previous fever had burned something into his hands. His studio swarmed with pictures and writings of elegant nightmares. The same wrong angles, the same drowned architecture. He was tedious in manner, honest in fact. Confirming his tale was true, I made way to New Orleans to visit Inspector Legrasse to verify his story. He retold the events of the raid in such vivid detail, it was as if he was there yesterday, memory intact. I held the very idol he brought back from the bayou and stared too long at its hateful beauty. I began to think my uncle had not died of heart failure or murder, but something much more ancient and powerful. Regardless, that was the end of my journey at the time. There were no more trails to follow. With such heightened evidence now present and real to me, I felt the dread of never getting closure. Part 4. The Tale of Gustav Johansen and the Revival of the Search for Cthulhu. Lines and stories converge. Paterson, New Jersey to Sydney, Australia, April 1925. Present day. Months later, curiosity going cold, Francis Thurston notices an old Australian newspaper used as shelf liner beneath mineral specimens. A photograph detonates everything. My last-ditch effort to find out more about the ancient artifacts and curious mania spread through the world began in a museum in Paterson, New Jersey. Speaking with the curators, I was allowed to visit the vaults and rooms otherwise prohibited by visitors. It was there, in the museum back room, I stumbled upon a half-tone article from the Sydney Bulletin, April 18, 1925. A stone idol almost identical to Legrasse's. The article described a derelict steam yacht, SS Alert of Dunedin, towed into Sydney on April 12th with one survivor and one corpse aboard. The survivor, Gustaf Johansen, a Norwegian shipmate, clutched the idol and refused to fully explain how 6 men had died on an island that no maps or charts had record of. The dates on the captain's log were described briefly: storms on March 1st, landfall March 23rd, a great blow on April 2nd. These dates rang like a hammer, as they were the same 3 dates my files had already taught me to fear. After reading the clippings, I immediately set sail for New Zealand and Australia, then to Oslo, chasing echoes, hoping to find Gustaf Johansen, to get a first-hand recount of his time at sea and more about the island. When I arrived in Sydney, I discovered the yacht was sold to a commercial fishing company, and the idol lay in a museum case, once more beyond geology's power to name. Sydney's records yielded little. In Auckland, New Zealand, I learned Johansen had gone home to Norway, after a curious dereliction turned his hair completely white in a matter of days, and those days coincided with the mass hysteria people were experiencing across the globe. We sailed once again from New Zealand to Norway, landing in Oslo. Disappointment arose when his widow told me he was dead, knocked down by falling papers in a dockside port. The doctors wrote heart failure, similar to my granduncle. The pattern wrote silence. What felt like a dead end, we prepared to depart the home when a hand of hope came to us. Gustaf's widow had stopped us, and, from a locked drawer of the late Gustaf Johansen's desk, she handed me a manuscript he left behind. She said we can have it, considering she only spoke Norwegian and the entire thing was written in English. She thought it was written that way to keep her safe from knowing. She had known there was a tragedy on that yacht all those years ago, but never heard the full story. There was a sigh of relief as she handed it to me. A sense of closure, perhaps, or that she was free from her curiosity to find out what really happened. We set sail the next day to London, and I read Gustaf's manuscript with the sea thudding the hull like a hand. Part 5. Johansen's Log, South Pacific, March to April 1925. This is the manuscript of Gustaf Johansen. After leaving Norway, Johansen's words, sparing and stunned, reconstructed themselves on the pages in clear, horrific acuity. I read through Johansen's log, excited to see where the next continent or city would lead me next. After reading through its entirety, however, I paused. With the shipmate's tale in mind, I feared going any further would be catastrophic. From his account, Gustaf's ship set sail on February 20th across the Pacific. On March 1st, during an extraordinary storm, an earthquake-borne wave shoved them due south. The SS Alert of Dunedin was utterly off course. March 22nd, in the fog and sheets of rain, they clocked one schooner, the SS Emma, coming towards them. As they met with Gustaf's ship, the trader-turned-gun platform ship, crewed by hard men in Cthulhu cultist robes, ordered them back. Modern-day pirates or government-entrusted guards of a place they should not go. Gustaf and his crew were going to find out. The SS Alert of Dunedin opened fire, while the crew of the SS Emma boarded them under a hail of brass. In the close slaughter that followed, Gustaf's sailors took the schooner at terrible cost. Captain Collins died. Gustaf Johansen, now in command, chose to continue on. He and his men ventured in the cabin of the SS Emma and was beholden to strange drawings with symbols similar to Legrasse's and my granduncle's descriptions. Drawings depicting towering, non-Euclidean cities with Cthulhu rising from the depths. A shrine to the idol lay in the middle of the room, ill-lit by candles, with guttural viscera strewn about the floor and walls. Writings of the island and their intentions were clear, to enter some unknown city and release the unimaginable horror while the connection to the Old One's world was strongest. Gustav, after taking the idol, had to learn what the enemy had been guarding and began sailing towards the island. As the fog dimmed over the ocean waves, they soon sighted a pillar of stone, then a coastline of mud, weed, and blocks of greenish masonry. This was no mere island. It was the corpse city of Retelling looming up from impossible depths, piercing through the ocean surface. No natural trees or flora, just buildings jutting from the waves. No seaman's language can carry what he writes next. The sun seemed wrong there, leaking through a sickly green hue that twisted light. Corners didn't behave. Convex became concave when you blinked. They made landfall and climbed toward a colossal door carved with the squid dagon they had seen on the idol. A blockade fortress wall surrounded the city, either to protect it from intruders entering or, as the men feared more, a prison to keep something in. It could not be a door, and yet was nothing else. One of the men found the seam. The slab, an acre in size, tilted inward with a slowness like a thought changing. From the gap leaked a darkness that felt alive. Darkness that dimmed daylight as if it were smoke. The smell was rot and mist from an unknown sea. The water they glimpsed between the opening of the slab was warm and black. Something moved below with a wet, patient sound. A creature they had never seen before. At first, the slow movement became hypnotic, but then, its eyes flew open and came bursting out. Johansen could not truly describe it, only that it was mountainous in size and a mistake of nature. He looked around, watching in dreamlike paralysis as men died without being touched, their minds irrevocably lost, simply unable to comprehend. Others were taken away in a blur of claws. 2 made it to the yacht as the thing, Cthulhu of the idols, slid into the ocean waves and came after them with strokes that heaved up walls of sea. With steam still rising, Johansen did the one unthinkable thing left. He turned the boat, wheel hard over, and rammed the nightmare head-on. The bow entered the body like a blade into a jellyfish. The thing burst and reassembled. That was enough. The SS alert of Dunedin fled as the pieces drew together again in the boiling wake. On April 2nd, the storm took the ship and Johansen's memory alike. He wrote the rest from fragments, rescued by the freighter SS Vigilant, the inquiry, the idol in his trunk, the laughter of his last companion dying in fits. He put the manuscript away where his wife would not read it. He waited for the end he must have known would come. Part 6. The Madness from the Sea. Closing the box, Boston Aftermath. Present day. Back in Boston with the idol's twin and the manuscript, Francis Thurston understands the only safety is ignorance, and knows he has none left. I placed Gustav's manuscript down. My convictions became clear. An adventure across the seas, picking up where my granduncle left off, the discovery I was expecting to find became a faint and hopeful aspiration. What I ended up finding was the beginnings of a connection to something otherworldly. And, if I were to explore further, those unimaginable links would form a bond of pure chaos and madness itself. To see the connections between our sliver of reality bending and converging with that of the older ones, Cthulhu and the space out of time would cause one's mind to fade away. I decided to go no further on this journey, to protect my sanity and others from drowning in an ocean of reality we simply were not meant to cross. I placed Johansen's account beside the bas-relief and Angel's papers in a tin box and locked it. My thoughts reeled over the links between worlds. The lines fit too neatly. The March 1 quake, now believed to be the city of Retelling rising from the sea. Then the worldwide dreams, The feverish art, the March 23rd landfall causing mass hysteria, the April 2nd storm that seemed to slam some door shut again. That's when the hysteria subsided everywhere, including in the mind of Mr. Wilcox from Rhode Island. My discoveries connected this tale simply. Retelling had heaved upward enough to crack a hinge. Our thoughts and psychic connection with Cthulhu and its world helped keep the door open. Then the sea and the efforts of Gustav Johansson's men set it back. I now look back at my mental island of blissful ignorance, forever tainted by what I know now. Cthulhu still sleeps in that submerged city, I think, sealed, not slain. The cults still keep the chance. And I, who have correlated too much, do not expect to live to old age. My mind is beginning to fade. If this manuscript survives me, let whoever finds it practice caution. Some truths don't grant wisdom. They collect you. This concludes The Call of Cthulhu, written by H.P. Lovecraft, a modern rewrite.